Hi, and welcome to Mrs. PM Reads. Today we are continuing in our story, Zoo, by James Patterson and Michael Ledwidge. We will be beginning this video in, I think we're still book 2, chapter 25. In the last video, Oz had crashed the Jeep and Abraham passed away. He didn't survive. Well, he was attacked by a lion, but and so Oz was trying to get away from the lions. The lions were still coming after him. He actually shot the main lion. And at this point, he's trying, they got video of the lion attack. And so he now has proof that the lions are kind of behaving abnormally. So he now is trying to get back to civilization without becoming lion dinner. All right, chapter 25. Back up on the tall grass clearing where we'd been attacked. I hunched down and watched the other Land Rover parked beneath the sausage tree for a time. I listened carefully. Nothing. The wind hushed the grass in rippling waves. Birds reeled in circles high overhead in the punishingly empty blue sky. I guessed it to be late afternoon. I debated going back to see if the truck was still working. Had the keys still been in it? I couldn't remember. What with all those lions leaping for my throat, I'd forgotten to check. Though it was a nice day, I definitely would have preferred to drive. A wide expanse of grassland the length of a football field stretched flat between me and the parked truck, which seemed deserted. But it was almost too quiet. At last, I decided against it. It was too risky. It would be foolish to go toward the lions. Though they were nowhere to be seen, that didn't mean anything. This was their neighborhood, and besides, there was no way to predict their unstable behavior. They could be on their way back right now. I knew I had to go in the other direction, on foot, back toward the camp. I kept as low as I could as I skirted the glade. I found the rutted tire trail we'd driven in on and began following it back to the safari camp. Glumly, I glanced up at the sun, which started to descend toward the salt flats on the horizon. It would be dark in a few hours. Wasn't looking forward to that. I picked up my pace. The camp was only about 5 miles away, but I was looking at 5 miles through a zoo without cages, where some of the animals seem to have gone schizoid. The sun dried my clothes to a crust, and then I got soaked again as I waded back through the river ford. I was hot and exhausted and starting to get thirsty, but decided not to drink the water for fear of parasites. I walked for an hour or so before I spotted the river dock where we'd picked up the Botswanans at the other end of a grassy field. They and their canoe were gone. After almost getting eaten, I didn't blame them for pissing off, leaving. They'd known how wrong things were in the environment, how important it was to get out of here while there still was a chance. I headed toward the dock to see if there might be another boat. That's when I noticed a sudden movement in the trees off to my right. Though there was no breeze, the trees seemed to be waving ever so slightly. They also seemed to glisten as if they were slathered in oil. Oh, I felt something crawl up my ankle. It was an ant, not just any ant. It was a doryless, an African driver ant. By its badass mandibles, I knew it was a soldier. Some indigenous tribes actually use the driver ant soldiers themselves as makeshift sutures. Their bite is so strong that putting one of them on each side of a gash will hold it together. That's what was covering everything: the trees, the grass, the ground. Millions upon millions of driver ants swarmed through the field in a loose black column. It had to be at least a mile long and 6 feet wide. The ants were the size of a baby's fingers and the cool color of red wine. I flicked off the bug and squashed it under the heel of my boot. Now, I love animals as much as the next biologist, but I do not like bugs. They don't do it for me. My subcortex says, ick, get them off me. I've always known that entomology was not my bag, and the doryless is an especially nasty customer. The frenzied column of ants connected 2 dark masses in the field. I realized they were Cape buffalo calves. My guess was they'd wandered into the path of the ants and been overwhelmed. Already dead, with most of their hides stripped, they were now in the process of being consumed by the living sea of bugs. The doryless, or siafu, as it is called by the Bantu, can sometimes have colonies of 50 or 60 million. Like a foraging army, the colonies live on the march, attacking anything they come in contact with, including animals and sometimes children. Death often results from asphyxiation when the flood of bugs crawls down the victim's throat. I cringed as I looked at the shiny, squirming black carpet extending into the distance. It was truly incredible. Then I turned away and went to the river. Chapter 26. I had just made it back to the trail when I heard a scream. It was hard to make out over the wind and splashing water, but it was definitely a human scream coming from the direction of the river dock. Apparently, I was not alone out here. I heard it again, and then once more, as I ran back across the field away from the ants. It sounded like a woman. I remembered the bloody clothes from the massacred animal spotted safari and picked up my pace. I arrived at the end of the dock and stopped short at the edge of the riverbank. There was a white woman with dark hair clinging to a large rock in the middle of the river. What the hell was she doing up there was a mystery. She was wearing khaki pants, but was barefoot. Her clothes, turn the page too soon. Her clothes were soaked. The clothes were soaked flat against her skin. She clung to the pinnacle of the rock, scrambling for balance with her feet and hands. I cupped my hands and shouted across the water, "Can you move?" In retrospect, it was a strange thing to say. She glanced over at me, seeing me for the first time. The look she gave me was if she'd never seen a person before. I didn't know whether she knew English or not. Then she let loose another scream, pointing upriver to my right. I followed the direction of her point with my eyes and saw what looked like a 15-foot-long clump of grayish mud appear on the surface. It wasn't mud. This had more teeth than the average mud clump. It was a Nile crocodile, the largest and most aggressive species of crocodile in Africa. As I watched, its scaly, spiny, and very powerful tail flicked and began floating out into the middle of the stream toward the woman clinging to the rock. I didn't know how the hell she'd managed to get herself into this situation, but I ordered myself to help her out of it. I had 4 rounds left. Make them count, Oz. Dropped to one knee and lined up with the Mauser's sights with the crocodile's paddle-shaped head. I balanced the barrel against my arm, held my breath, and pulled the trigger. The gun cracked and kicked hard into my shoulder. I saw a splash in the water in front of the crocodile. I'd missed. I sighted again and squeezed off 2 more shots. There was no splash. I nailed the son of a bitch twice. I couldn't see where, but I'd heard bullets hitting meat. But it didn't die. That would have been too easy. All it did was turn toward me with the quick sideways jerk of its surfboard-sized head, as if I'd tapped it on the shoulder. I blasted 1 more bullet at it and got the sucker right on the crown of its head. That did the trick. It started out from the muck a moment, then sank and flopped over, belly up in the river. I looked to my right again. Oh, a second crocodile racing downriver in our direction. Then I noticed the rest of them. In a lagoon some distance upriver was a basque of at least 4 crocodiles and another 3 sunning themselves on the shore. No wonder they were riled up. It looked like the woman had entered a nesting area. I aimed at the next approaching croc. It was coming at us like an animal, an animated hunk of driftwood. I pulled the trigger on nothing. I'd spent my last round and the gun clicked on an empty chamber. Chapter 27. The crocodiles glided through the water toward the woman while I sat on the bank with an unloaded gun. A light bulb appeared over my head and I threw down the gun. I cupped my hands to my mouth and shouted across the water, "Be right back!" I turned tail and began running back the way I'd come, into the field behind me. I peeled off my wet shirt as I ran into thrashing brown grass. Just to clarify, I was about to dive into a horde of army ants with my shirt off. I ran through the glittering black carpet, feeling ants crunching under my boots with each step, to the corpse of the buffalo calf. With my wet shirt, I slapped ants from its gnarled, stiffened hooves, grabbed the body by the leg, and began dragging it back toward the river as fast as I could. The ants went mad. A softly clicking, chattering swarm of ruby dark ants followed after me. I could see the column shift and darken as millions of insects got new marching orders to deal with the intruder. I saw the message spread through the colony, borne on pheromones from one pair of antennae to the next. The only advantage I had was my legs. The calf was lighter than I'd expected, as it had already been hollowed out by some of the ants. The ants scampered up my arms and I swatted them off the best I could. I had 10 or 15 bites throbbing on my arms and chests by the time I made it back to the river dock. The pain was no big deal. It was only like being shot repeatedly with a staple gun. The black swirling column had fallen a long way behind me by the time I arrived at the riverbank. 2 crocodiles were swimming circles around the woman on the rock. I ran out onto the creaking wood dock with the buffalo calf. "Hey," I shouted, "dinner time, here!" I heaved the buffalo calf into the river. It splooshed into the slow, muddy current below me like a fat kid doing a cannonball. One of the crocodiles turned when it sent the heap of floating meat, when it saw the heap of floating meat. A bird in hand is better than one on top of a rock, he probably thought. But the other one lingered, swimming a languid circle around the woman. I snatched up the rifle and heaved it by its barrel at the crocodile. The butt of the rifle splashed next to its tail. Then it, too, turned and went toward the buffalo calf, following the other crocodile, who was now ripping it into dead meat. Confused ants stippled the thrashing water around them, flailing crazily on the surface of the river as the two crocodiles tore apart the carcass. I ran along the shore until I was opposite the dark-haired woman. "Swim to me," I shouted. "You have to swim to me now." She shook her head and closed her eyes, hugging the rock tighter. "It's okay. You have to. You're running out of time. It's your only chance." She looked at me for a moment. She looked at the crocodiles not far upriver. She climbed down into the water and pushed herself away from the rock. She wasn't a good swimmer. Granted, conditions weren't ideal. Her arms slapped the water and her feet flailed. She seemed to take a day to paddle across the 20-odd feet of calm water to the bank. Come on, I said, my eyes flicking back and forth between her and the crocodiles. I almost had to stifle the urge to clap when she finally arrived on shore. She stumbled when she tried to climb up the steep embankment onto the clearing and fell to her knees in the mud. No, you've got it. Come on, take my hand. I was lying flat on my belly, reaching my hand down to her, and then I felt a tickling cloud of insect legs skittering up my bare back. Hurry! My backside was already flaming with pain. The woman grasped my hand and I nearly ripped her arm off, dragging her to her feet, up the embankment and onto the clearing. Move! I screamed, yanking her into a run with one hand as I slapped at myself with the other. The ants were everywhere. On my neck, in my hair, my ears. I spat out that one that had crawled into my mouth. The sound that involuntarily rose out of me was what I might call a shrill shriek of revulsion, like a woman standing on a chair screaming at a mouse. I didn't stop running until I tripped over the tire tracks and fell to the ground. Clear of the pulsing red-black column, I threw off my backpack and rolled over in the dust as though I were on fire, spitting and slapping at myself. I literally had ants in my pants. With panicky, fumbling fingers, I jerked at my bootlaces and kicked off my boots. I tore off my pants and leaped out of them, yelping as I hopped up and down, flapping my pants as though they were a flag, ants flying out of the legs like flung pebbles. After swiping them all off my legs, I thumbed the waist of my boxers for the most vital check of all. Clear. Thank God. Ant-free now, I squeezed my feet back into my unlaced boots and went about stomping the little bastards as they tried to scatter. Not so tough without your friends, are you? I screamed at them, hopping like a crazed leprechaun, doing a little ant kill jig in the dust. Die! When the last ants scampered away, I caught my breath and inspected my arms, my legs, my chest, and back. My flesh was pebbled with welts on top of welts, each about as red and juicy looking as a maraschino cherry. Suddenly, as though shaken from a dream, I remembered the woman. I turned and looked up at her close for the first time. She was petite, tiny as a child, with slender bird-like bones. Even covered in river mud, she was undeniably good-looking. Olive skin, bitumen black hair, slightly dusted with premature gray, sharp brown eyes, and high, distinct cheekbones. "You saved my life," she said softly. She was still gazing somewhere in the middle distance. Her English had an elegant European lit, what I thought was a French accent. Vowels in the front of her mouth, consonants brushed with feathers. She hugged her knees, her body a seesaw anchored on her tailbone, rocking back and forth in the dirt. She definitely wasn't all there yet, but the lights were coming on. Then I recalled I wasn't wearing pants. I slapped them into the dirt to knock any stray ants out of them and worried them on over my boots. I checked my camera in the backpack to make sure all was fine and sat down on a rock to lace up my boots. "You saved my life," she said again, more lucid now. "Actually," I said, grabbing her hand to pull her up, "I'm not done." And that is where we're going to stop for today. So that was interesting. Now, it didn't say that the ants were acting unusually aggressive. Seems that maybe that's the way those type of ants act normally, but not fun. I mean, I think the most we have is the red ants, and those bites. Those are unpleasant. So I can't even imagine the other ones. All right, you guys. I hope you will join me to see what happens next in our story Zoo. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.